Department of Justice has announced a new indictment against disgraced FTX founder Sam Bankman-Fried. Prosecutors allege the former CEO paid out $40 million to at least one Chinese government official in a bribe to unfreeze Alameda Research's accounts in China. These accounts held more than $1 billion in assets, according to the DOJ.
Yeah, so this is interesting. So he had his money tied up in a Chinese exchange that they had shut down or they'd frozen the assets of. So he had $1 billion he wanted to move out. So he paid a $40 million bribe to Chinese official, allegedly. That's what the U.S. government is alleging. I think it's interesting in the context of all the kind of Chinese stuff we're talking about with TikTok and everything else. Reminder that this was someone who donated tons of money to some Democrats, also to some Republicans. Also, generous media funding of several progressive mainstream media organizations that generated what seemed to me like pretty favorable initial coverage of Sam Bankman-Fried. He was spoken of in very sympathetic terms, in very, but he's so well-meaning, such a whiz kid. You know, he was trying to do something really good, and his cause is so noble, and maybe just got caught up in some stuff. So this is interesting that this is what they're trying to get him on right now, and then I assume there will be other charges.
Yes, this is just the tip of the iceberg. This is from the New York Times' most recent coverage. They've now charged Mr. Bankman-Fried with 13 criminal counts, including securities fraud, money laundering, and violating campaign finance laws. The 31-year-old is facing more years in prison now because of these additional charges. If convicted, this might put more pressure on him to take a guilty plea, is what people are thinking by stacking up these kinds of charges. I mean, look, you point to the favorable media coverage that he's gotten. Some of it, I would argue, has continued even through his indictment, and he seems to believe that he's going to get favorable media attention.
He loves media attention.
You know, even post-indictment, even as he was hiding out in his parents' house, he very famously was very trusting of this media that had been so good to him in the past, and was surprised, seemingly, when his DMs with, I think, a Vox reporter were published as an article. And he continues to have these moments where he acts with the degree of hubris, giving these interviews, sitting in front of the camera, potentially with, in one instance, it looked like there were some off-screen actors, maybe even his lawyer parents advising him. But he doesn't seem to think that he can incriminate himself. He seems to think that doing these appearances is going to do nothing but improve his standing in the public eye and potentially legally as well.
And he's
very
just wrong about that. He's absolutely wrong about it. I mean, he might improve. It's totally possible he could improve the people's opinion of him in the public. But this is not. What the public thinks of him is ultimately not going to matter. Like, they're going to charge him. I don't see any reason from a law enforcement perspective why they would not go as hard as possible on him, which is generally what they do. You have someone who's making all of these statements that can then be used against him, who is very easy to sort of entrap himself. You're gonna throw the book at when he's making your job easier. They're going to have all sorts of things to charge him with because they're going to want us, look at us taking down this major this guy who is doing crimes. Yeah,
I think that's possible.
I don't think any of the glorifying media attention is going to do anything but, he can pad the walls with the profiles. He can pad his jail cell walls with the profiles of him.
Well, look, I do think that historically people who commit financial crimes, despite having stolen, in so many cases, so much more money than your average petty criminal, stealing, deodorant, razors, diapers, or whatever it is from CVS or Walgreens, tend to do much less time. There is a perception, there is a bias built into the criminal justice system that a certain kind of person can't handle jail, or that their years of their lives spent in jail are more wasted or more worthy outside of jail than other people.
Very silly.
But that's why there have been pushes at various times to have more standardized sentencing guidelines and things, because I've heard it in the course of my practice from judges who have opined on how much worse it is for a white-collar criminal to spend time in jail than someone who is poorer or blacker, or they seem to think is going to be more well-suited to an incarcerated life, or who has degrees or business prospects outside of jail that makes it seem more worthy to some folks to be outside of jail. So I do think that there's a sentiment that's hard to escape that this man, this whiz kid, would be especially disadvantaged in a criminal context. But we'll see what happens.
Yeah. So what do you make of him paying a bribe to a Chinese official. We're talking about all our concerns about how how the Chinese government's behavior can affect us here in the U.S. and the self-censorship that goes on and all that.
I think that China is a country, one of, if not the biggest economy in the world, and that people are going to have to get used to some things happening in China without using the specter of China to be some boogeyman about like communism and scariness. And there's a way that CCP, Chinese Communist Party, has been injected into a lot of stories to make them seem, I think, sexier than they are. There are other countries in the world. Some of them have different economic systems to the United States. China's government is not communist in any kind of traditional kind of leftist sort of a way. It is authoritarian. And
I mean, it's communist in the you got to pay the party official to get your business done.
If that's how you want to define communism, you can knock your socks off. But the irony is that if we're talking about you have to pay the business person to get your business done, Ukraine, our most entrenched, valiant ally, is the context of Joe Biden's son being paid these amounts of untoward dollars. He was on the payroll for a Ukrainian energy company, getting, $50,000 a month for zero expertise whatsoever. So the idea that this is about communism and not about global corruption that is endemic to all of these countries and oligarchs is a tough pill to swallow. So a bribe is a bribe. It was an American capitalist doing a bribe to get his way in China. And so it doesn't, I don't know, what do you think about it all?
I don't know. I think he's going to go down for it. That's what I think.
Yeah.
It's I think there's a certain amount of hubris in having trusted to put so much money, $1 billion, in a kind of foreign exchange that you'd have even less control over than you would in the U.S. I mean, this is all so much just gambling, really.
Yes.
An atrocious amount of gambling, which fine, gamble all you want, but then when you lose, you lose. I mean, this is kind of a theme we're returning to a lot with the crypto sector and the tech sector more broadly, is that gamble with your own money if you want to do it, or gamble with other people's money if they're allowing you to do it, but don't expect anybody to come in and rescue you, specifically not the government.
Yeah, I'm be curious to know as this story begins to unfold why the money in the Chinese accounts was frozen. This happened back in 2001, so it predates the fall of FTX that we all covered last year. The implication is somehow that it was an inappropriate freezing, but that is not entirely clear. There have been any number of financial issues going on with crypto and FTX. This sector for some time it's been unstable, and I'd be interested to know the background here. And whether or not there was some indication that we should have had some indication earlier that there were problems with FTX if we had been paying more attention to what was going on in other parts of the world. But certainly it is an interesting story to follow precisely because he didn't get scrutiny for a very long time. This seems like one in the line of whiz kids that have gone down from Elizabeth Holmes and Theranos to, in a lot of ways, the public flip-flop on even how we perceive folks like Mark Zuckerberg. Went from being one of the best jobs that an aspiring college graduate can get. You can go to graduate Harvard and go work at Facebook, or you go work at McKinsey. And now he is a bête noire of politics across the political spectrum.
How it happens. Well, we'll keep following the tales of Sam Bankman-Fried, and we'll have more Rising right after this.